Thank you, Professor Srivastav, Director Dr. Chaturvedi, fellow panelists, faculty members, students. Great pleasure to be here. It's the first time I've come to BIMTech, and it's an excellent campus, very large campus, and a very inspiring campus, especially when one sees young students and young faces around. We also begin to feel a little young. I've taught for a major part of my life, and let me tell you, I miss teaching a lot, especially interacting with young minds. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that I'll be able to do this more often than I have. The topic has been introduced to you, so what I'm going to say in my opening maybe 10 or 12 minutes is the impact I think that demonetization has had on the economy and what we need to do in the future to ensure that some of the benefits that we've been able to leverage are sustained over a period of time. Because I think at the outset, let me say that if we don't follow it up with the necessary additional, what I will call complementary measures, then this is likely to be a one-off temporary shock to the system, which will not deliver the intended benefit. So a lot of complementary measures need to be taken if we have to get to the root of the disease, which is the creation of black money, which harms the economy definitely in terms of what it does to growth rates. So where are we? I mean, in the backdrop of this exercise, where did we stand when demonetization was introduced, and what has demonetization done? You're probably all aware, since you're students of, as Dr. Chaturvedi was saying, you were students of management, and economics is a core subject which kind of feeds into a number of other courses that you study. We stood at that time as the fastest major growing economy in the world. And now we become perhaps the second fastest growing economy in the world. And there are kind of disparate views on whether the slowdown, the shock to growth is going to continue or whether it's going to be temporary. So from 7.5% or 7.1%, we are down to about 6.5%, 6.6%. CSO, the Central Statistical Organization, has projected 7%, but it hasn't factored into the impacts of demonetization. The World Bank, the ADB, the IMF, the CMIE have all factored in the impact of demonetization. And what the consensus seems to be is that the consensus kind of impact is about 0.5, so 0.5% is what we are going to lose as a result of demonetization. And that, I don't know whether that's going to be right or wrong. It's, forecasting in a phase of, in a period of uncertainty is a mug's game, so I won't attempt to do that. But the consensus forecast is about 0.5% of GDP. And that's not a small amount for a $2 trillion economy. And why has this happened? Professor Srivastav mentioned why this happened is because you took away, in one fell swoop as it were, almost 87% of cash from an economy, which is essentially a cash-driven economy. Right? 98% of our transactions are done in cash. Our kind of penetration of debit and credit cards, and now the boost to, I'll speak a little bit about the digital economy and what the constraints there and what we need to do there are, but it was a major shock to the economy. 98% of all transactions are done in cash. Now, this takes into account what is called the stock of the black money, and it took care of the stock of the black money. The expectation of the government that not all money will come back into the system has been belied, and 97% of that money is back in the system. So, and what the implications of that are going to be on this budget and on monetary policy and fiscal policy, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that towards the end. But I think those are important considerations where Mr. Jaitley must take into account on what the impact of so much money coming back into the system, because I feel that could have given what is called a stimulus, a fiscal stimulus to the economy. And this is something that has been talked about in the media, but not too much. And how is this fiscal stimulus come about? Now, let me just tell you in layman's terms, because of this impact on GDP, the government is thinking about kind of trying to offset the impact of demonetization. And how do you offset the impact of demonetization? One of the ways to do that is through kind of instituting in the economy a fiscal stimulus. Remember the financial crisis, the Lehman type of crisis, which was permanent. The difference between the financial crisis of 2008 and the difference between this demonetization, they are both exogenous, I think, supply-side shocks. But the first one was permanent. Permanent in the sense that it was uncertain. This you know is going to be a temporary shock, and there are auto-corrective mechanisms in the economy that could take care of that. So my first suggestion to in a sense, if I were to be arrogant enough to make a suggestion to the government, to the Ministry of Finance, will be that, if fiscal consolidation is to be sacrificed for this year, then it has to be done with a lot of serious consideration of what has happened in the interim. What I mean by that is, do not, get away from the path of fiscal consolidation which this government started last year. If you're interested in the numbers, we can talk about it during the discussion. But my first point, as I said, is India's tax to GDP ratio is very low. We know that. We need to increase that tax to GDP ratio. And perhaps demonetization and GST together will have an impact on the tax to GDP ratio. But while we increase the tax to GDP ratio to better fund our public goods and infrastructure, which India faces tremendous deficit on, we should not forego, or we should not go away from the path of fiscal consolidation in the economy. The good news, okay, so that's the first point. The good news is that a lot of things that the government was wanting to do in the economy, i.e. boost infrastructure spending, reduce the interest rate to boost corporate investment, has been achieved in this process. And the monetary impact of demonetization, which is something which is not much talked about, but I think it is something which is significant, which has happened. Liquidity has increased in the banking system, interest rates are down, the yield curve has flattened out, bond yields are looking better now, the prices have come down, interest rates have come down, and this has given a boost to the economy. So the monetary impact of demonetization, what monetary policy could not achieve for so many years. Remember, there was this kind of, I wouldn't say conflict, but struggle between one arm of the government and the other, is whether we should reduce interest rates to boost investment. Demonetization has had an impact on interest rates. Interest rates across the board are down, led of course by some kind of moral suasion to the State Bank of India, and followed of course, since the leader has reduced interest rates, there's been a knock-on effects on all other banks, and there's been an 80 basis point, at least an 80 basis point reduction in the interest rates, which is good news for the economy, and hopefully that these interest rates will continue to head southward, which will boost private investment, hopefully, in the future. But that's not the only thing that you need to boost private investment, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you, management students, of what we need to do about boosting private investment, because the execution bottlenecks in India are well known, the labor laws, the infrastructure, the kind of transactions cost, which is a euphemism for all the institutional and corrupt bottlenecks that we have within the country. All that has to proceed simultaneously. Part of it should be taken care of by GST, which will become a transparent mechanism, so that not only does the tax to GDP ratio increase, but also everything becomes online, and we are able to take the benefits of a more market-driven economy. So that, so fiscal consolidation, interest rate decline has been kind of a positive, I would say, at least interest rates decline have been a positive and less kind of discussed and a less in the public domain discussed positive fallout of demonetization. Of course, I mean, it's a huge negative supply side shock, and there have been negative fallouts, and there will be negative fallouts. But I'm not a political analyst, but what I hear from my political friends is that people are willing to wait this temporary shock, they're willing to wait for the benefits that are likely to emerge from demonetization in the future, and that this is kind of a debate between what India could do in the future to root out the menace of black money and corruption, terrorist financing and all. But will this deliver those intended benefits? Well, we need to do at least 2 to 3 things. One is politically very difficult, and I'm not going to venture into that. the political campaign financing of political parties, people have talked about that. That needs to be addressed. It needs to become more transparent, because in some sense that's where a lot of this emerges from. The second thing that we need to do to root out this menace of black money is, and it's underappreciated, I think, amongst people like you and me, but within the government, I think it's appreciated, and it links to what I call increasing the tax to GDP ratio. It's improving the friendliness of the tax department and improving the compliance rate of citizens to pay taxes. Now, we've done studies in ICRIER. You go to our website, you'll see some studies. I'm not going to discuss it too much. The conclusions of those studies, several studies, are as follows. One is that people don't pay taxes for the fear of what would happen to them in the future. It's not the 3% that pay taxes, but it's what those additional people will get into the net of tax, and they're fearful of what the state will do to them, and therefore they don't want to get into the tax net. Second, more rational, and I think unfair reason for not paying taxes is that often when we interview people, they say, what do we get in return for the taxes that we pay? What are the public goods that the government gives to us? Why should we pay taxes? Why should we pay taxes for money to be frittered away on useless and frivolous things, and sometimes on lining people's pockets? And the benchmark there is countries like Norway and Sweden and Finland, the Scandinavian countries, and even the United States. The quality of the public goods that is delivered by the system is so good that often you kind of don't have to provide on your own. And the public goods, it could be parks, it could be roads, it could be schools, it could be medical institutions, it could be anything. You don't have to pay to do your PhD in countries like Scandinavia. Education is free all the level to the PhD. Right? Because that the state has enough money to fund these institutions and fund the public goods. I mean, education is a kind of a merit public good and ought to be funded also by the state, and in India it's also funded privately. So often people say that I don't pay taxes because I don't get quality public goods in return for what I'm paying. You often hear this argument. And this will always remain, whether that's the good thing or bad thing. You heard of Sheila Dikshit Bhagidari system, which is continued in this regime. Is it, unless you pay taxes, we can't give you the public goods. And if there are no public goods, then you're not going to pay taxes. So it's a chicken and egg problem. But that is something that this government is designing itself, is readying itself to address, to increase the tax to GDP ratio. And some of it will happen through the GST. Real estate, gold, etc. The GST, stamp duties will come down, compliance rates will increase. The cost of paying taxes, you don't pay taxes, yes, but soon you are going to pay taxes. I don't have a choice because my tax is deducted at source. But people who have a choice say that it's very difficult to pay taxes because compliance rates, I'm completing into, compliance rates are very high, which means apart from the tax you pay, to comply with paying taxes, that costs. And all countries estimate this cost, including, we've done it once in India before. Arindam Mukherjee from NIPFP estimated the cost, and it's very, very high. So compliance cost of paying taxes, apart from, as I said, the tax that you pay, is fairly high. That deters people from paying taxes, and I leave it to you to guess what I'm talking about. So that needs to be increased, and the good news is that the government is making the CBDT, the Central Board of Direct Taxes, more friendly so that it becomes easier, and GST will introduce online payments of taxes. So that all that supply chain of paying taxes will become easier. I'll make two more points before I conclude. I think two important points is that the negative fallout of demonetization has been on jobs. And jobs, I think, is central to the Indian economy. We can argue till the cows come home whether it's manufacturing that is going to deliver India, on account of jobs, or whether it's going to be services, or whether it's going to be a combination of manufacturing and services. But the same kind of infrastructure bottlenecks that increase the cost of doing business in India are a kind of a negative impact on the costs of manufacturing in India, which prevents us from becoming as competitive as China has become in manufacturing. Remember, China is ceding space, and that space could be occupied by India. But a lot of those costs, I'm not talking about exchange rate manipulation at all, a lot of those costs related to infrastructure prevent manufacturing from getting entrenched, and therefore in our structural transformation, we've become a really service-dominated economy, and we are, in terms of per capita incomes, we are the only country in the world that has kind of so much services as a percentage of GDP at the same level of per capita income, i.e. we haven't been through that structural transformation from agriculture to manufacturing to services. We kind of bypassed manufacturing, and it's legend now why manufacturing was not being able to succeed in India, and we can discuss this more in the question answer session. But the point is that the All India Manufacturing Association estimates about 4 lakh jobs have been lost, and that could be, a reasonable estimate. But the point is, India needs to create jobs. 1 million a month, if you believe some figures that the erstwhile Planning Commission had come out with. But this is a critical area. It could make or break government if job creation falls short of potential. The last thing that I want to mention is, are we ready in terms of our digital economy, our digital transactions? Are we ready? And I think we are not ready as we speak now. It's given a boost to digital transaction, demonetisation, and necessarily so, because necessity is the mother of invention. There's been both a demand side uptake of digital transactions and digital payment systems, as well as a supply side. So you've got Paytm, MobiKwik, Instacash, and you've got the UPI, which is kicked in. You've got Bheem, the new application. So that's on the supply side. All these applications have come in. And then on the demand side, a number of us using smartphones, including in urban, peri-urban, semi-urban areas, have begun to use the system. And there's been a big boost to digital transactions. That's the good news. The bad news is that digital literacy, and especially the rules and regulations around digital payment systems, are still very anachronistic, and they don't meet with the current needs of a digital-based economy. i.e., the Information Technology Act dates back to 2000, and there is nothing in any of the acts that will take care of fraud, phishing, identity theft, financial theft on the net. There is no law. You'll have to fall back on the Indian Penal Code to be able to convict anybody. The number of digital and cyber crimes in India have increased. Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad in Parliament announced that there has been a 358% increase in cyber crime, and yet the rate of conviction remains very, very low. And the rate of convictions remains very low because not only is the law, I think, inadequate, the rules are inadequate, also the capacity to able to identify and judge on cyber crimes is very limited in India. Not only in India, but across the world, because this is a new dimension that is coming. I think we need to kind of improve the quality of our cyber network and cyber kind of legislation so that we are able to deal with something. It's absolutely asymmetric. Cyber world is asymmetric in the sense that's easy to cause damage and very difficult to prevent. So to perpetrate a kind of hack or a crime costs low, prevention is very high. So cyber warfare is very asymmetric. You must have heard of Stuxnet, all you youngsters, and you can imagine the destruction that Stuxnet could cause. And with Internet of Things, cyber warfare or cybercrime is going to become extremely pervasive, and we need laws to prevent that, and human capacity and human capital to be able to introduce, what I would say, preventive infrastructure so that the deterrence mechanism can also kick in if cybercrime happens. Thank you for listening to me. I'll be happy to answer.